All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming in for an early morning and choosing to spend your time with us today. This is one of two back-to-back telehealth intergroup-sponsored didactics or panel presentations. So this one is going to be, as on the title there, speaking about the current and future state of telehealth and emergency medicine. So some of the requisite slides here. For disclosures, Dr. Rios does have one that she's an employee and an option holder of Call9. And so our panel is going to be, I am Emily Hayden. I'm the Director of Telemedicine Emergency Medicine. I'm going to moderate this panel today. Judd Hollander is at the end there. We're going to have everybody do more introductions here. So I'm just, why don't we just do that right now? Judd, do you want to go ahead and do an introduction, who you are, where you're coming from, and
what it says on the slides. So I'm actually obviously an ER doc. I'm a senior VP at Thomas Jefferson, where I have enterprise-wide responsibility for telemedicine, urgent care, and sort of novel care delivery things that we're trying to do there. And I also have an associate dean title running up the research side of this and work with a team of people, including Brendan Carr, Kristen Rising, Aditi, Anna Marie Chang, and have been actually Tuesday, Kristen just got a $3.5 million grant from NIDDK for a randomized controlled trial in telemedicine. So our job is both to roll out the program and to study it in an academic side.
Please. I'm Aditi Joshi. I'm also from Thomas Jefferson University. I'm the medical director of Jeff Connect, which is our acute care telemedicine. So I run the programs in the emergency room, including our on-demand as well as our teletriage. Aside from that, I do our physician training, our education portion, which I work with Peter on some projects as well, and that. And I teach digital health to medical students as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Claritza Rios, and I work for Call9, which is a telemedicine company. I am emergency medicine, internal medicine, and palliative care, and I am the director of the palliative care service for Call9 as well as their current medical director. I do a lot of the training, product, and innovation, and very excited to be here.
I'm Peter Greenwald. I'm from Weill Cornell, which falls under the New York Presbyterian umbrella. New York Presbyterian is involved in a very large-scale telemedicine rollout that affects just about every aspect of care one could imagine. My role is I direct the service lines that are telemedicine related that affect the emergency department, primarily at Weill Cornell, although I'm also involved in provider education and medical school education in this area.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And so we are going to have some questions that I'm going to be asking about their programs and for topics I think that for most people in the room want to be hearing about, but we're really going to try to also reserve much of the time for you guys to be able to answer, or ask, not answer, maybe answer the questions, but ask questions to the panelists also. So please write down your questions. We are going to have plenty of time to go over them here. So first one, if we can just go down the line and maybe just describe the programs that are actually somehow touching upon emergency medicine, either that it is emergency medicine is providing the telemedicine or that you're receiving telemedicine in the emergency department. So, Judd, you want to start?
All right, so I'll start. This is a little more difficult without slides, but we envision our whole program, and I'll describe it for you and then speak, as I'm going along from an emergency medicine perspective. We call it the wheel or the circle of life. It's basically a clock, and if you start at 6 o'clock on the clock, patients are at their baseline. And the first thing that happens when somebody falls off their baseline, whether they're somebody with 18 million chronic diseases that just went home, or they're somebody that's a perfectly healthy 22-year-old college kid, is they get a little sick. And we actually talk about the little sick. And then if they don't get better, they get more sick, and we call them moderately sick. And then strategically up top when the clock strikes 12 is when they show up in the ER and they're in the acute care setting. As you know, a quarter of people that come to visit us in the ER get admitted to the hospital. They start coming out at 1 or 2 o'clock. Most of them do well, and 99+% go home. They go into the post-acute care phase, and then they go back to their baseline at 6 o'clock. And we've built out programs all around that circle. And so you can consider when you're just a little bit sick, in our program you could do a Jeff Connect on-demand call which is the program that Aditi runs. I'll let her talk more about that. But that's actually our own ER docs. I think we're the only program in the country that outsources none of our work. It's entirely 24/7, our same docs who work in the ER, dedicated to take care of patients. Whether you're our patient or not, you could go online, call in, and do that. We are developing in that spectrum what we call the virtual ER, which is the ability to call in and go get a CAT scan or an ultrasound or a lab test and circle back with us. So imagine the number of people you get that call their PCP and say, they got belly pain, go to the ER. You see them, you CAT scan a decent amount of them, they all have nothing, and they go home, with some nondescript belly pain. We're like, why go to the ER unless you're super high risk? Let's just do this all as an outpatient and take care of you and do the right thing. In the emergency department, we have a huge emergency department teletriage program. So far in this fiscal year, we've done about 35,000 patients that we've seen when they come into the emergency department. We staff it with one doc seeing 2 hospitals, and at one of our hospitals there is a triage nurse. We peek over the shoulder, write a note in the chart, write the orders, and then the patient will go through and get seen in the back. We're not yet discharging out of there. At the other hospital, we remove the triage nurse. There's a tech that does your vital signs. We pop you on the video. We see you. We do what's necessary. We again, write a note in the chart, both hospitals, write your orders. You go from there, if you're going to get an x-ray, immediately to x-ray. Then you come back to a room where somebody draws your bloods. Then you go to what we call an internal waiting room. So by the time your stuff comes back, you'll be getting to a room and your testing's been going on the whole time. And doing those programs, we've cut our left without being seen from 3 to under 1%, literally overnight. We began with all ER docs doing that. We're now going to an APP model, and hopefully in the next year we'll layer on some residents to do that as well. We have a program. We have a neurostroke network, which is an ER program. We're not really the ones that do it. Our neurovascular specialists do. In 38 hospitals, they'll do telemedicine into the neurologist to see if a patient needs TPA or a transfer or whatnot. They leave 83% of patients at the community hospital, so we're only taking the patients that actually really need procedures and making it easier for patients to get care near home rather than get shipped down to the mothership, 150 miles away and then not be able to have family see them. In the acute care setting, we don't do this a lot in the ER, but we have a program called Virtual Rounds, which means that you're potentially in the ER, your family member's not with you. We'll basically just Skype them into the room when the doc's in the room so that the family will know what's going on. We do that more on the inpatient side in the ER, but we periodically do that kind of stuff in the emergency department. And then we have a whole post-acute care program, which is largely done by the specialists, for people who are discharged with bundled care, but we actually see some of the patients that are discharged out of the ER via telemedicine a couple days later and had a robust program for that for a period of time so that residents could learn to follow up on their own patients and see them with synchronous audio-video telemedicine a couple days later. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and again, we do it in every specialty, in every department at, all 14 of our hospitals right now. Aditi, I'll let Aditi talk much more about the on-demand program.
Sure. So yeah, Judd gave a great overview of our program. I will mention about our on-demand, what we call Jeff Connect, which is the name of our platform as well as our program. And as he mentioned, it's 24/7, 365 staffed by our emergency department physicians. It's what you would consider the direct-to-consumer model that you might be aware that other programs such as MD Live and American Well and Teladoc do something similar. However, we're different. We're really trying to focus on the local area. We're looking in Philadelphia, the tri-state area where most of our patients are. We also try to convert some of them to Jefferson patients. There's a lot of hospitals within the Philadelphia region. So this is something that we do all the time. And as you mentioned about the teletriage, one thing that I think is very unique is that when we started this program, it started only with on-demand. We staffed it ourselves. And so we had a dedicated group of people and physicians doing telemedicine. When we started teletriage, which began about 18 months ago, we started having more physicians do this. So we went from a model where there was a set group of faculty doing telemedicine to now having almost all faculty doing some type of telehealth. And it has broadened our scope, our practice, and how many people are doing telehealth within our institution. That's it for now.
Hi, so Call9 brings emergency telemedicine to the bedside at skilled nursing facilities. And so we embed an emergency trained first responder that staffs the skilled nursing facility 24/7. Then that person connects with a board-certified emergency medicine physician or a palliative care physician, depending on the need of the patient. That physician then directs the first responder to perform an EKG, blood work, ultrasound, telemetry, depending on the patient's needs, and then implement a plan. What else do I need to tell you about our program? We have our own proprietary platform, a video platform, EHR. We conduct rounds, all this through our platform, and then interact with the skilled nursing facility primary team as well. In about 80% of our Call9 interactions, we are able to treat the patient in place, avoiding a hospital transfer, which obviously in the skilled nursing facility population can be quite traumatic. The implementation of palliative care is really important, as many of these patients just have a lot of symptom management issues that often become an emergency. And so that added layer has been extremely helpful in keeping patients out of the hospital, but also increasing the quality of the care that they're receiving.
So as I said, New York Presbyterian is involved in a multi-layered telemedicine implementation. In the emergency department last year, our telemedicine service lines touched on approximately 40,000 patients. Our services are in some ways similar to the ones that were just described for Jefferson. We have dedicated emergency department docs, our own faculty, doing shifts in telemedicine where they're caring for people in a variety of service lines. These include seeing low acuity patients in our own emergency departments, where patients who have low severity, have problems that can be cared for with few resources, have their primary contact in the ED be a telemedicine present physician. We do a direct-to-consumer service line where patients call from home, from the office, wherever they choose to call from, which is sometimes interesting locations. And in addition to that, we have kiosks scattered through Manhattan and Brooklyn where patients can see a physician in a kiosk when they initially go to the pharmacy for care. We have a provider in triage model where a APP sees patients arriving at 2 of our EDs and initiates orders for their ER evaluations. We have a program where we partner with a dedicated EMS team and provide care to very ill patients who have a relationship with our hospital at point of deterioration. Currently doing that with congestive heart failure patients, but soon to be expanding that out into a variety of other disease states. That's a program that I'm very passionate about. We have a series of programs that don't directly involve the ER physicians, but take place in the ED. We have nurses doing remote biomonitoring with a video component, an EICU sort of program, but focused in the emergency department that identifies patients who may have had a gap in the attention being paid by their bedside nurse, because ERs have a waxing and waning flow of patients, and sometimes attention gets directed one place. The biomonitoring program ensures a steady floor of attention paid to all patients who are on monitors, who again can also be eyeballed by the nurse. We have a telesitter program that we also employ for high-risk fall patients in the emergency department, where we have an aide basically doing security-style video monitoring of all fall risk patients and being in contact with a runner to intervene should behavior that looks like a fall is imminent be occurring. We have pharmacists coming into the ED on video to do telemed reconciliation with our patients in the ED. And then we have programs that are familiar to probably most in the room, including telepsychiatry evaluations in our smaller EDs, telestroke program, And we're expanding out with some of our specialty consults right now. We're working out the flow for a burn consultation as we speak.
Great, thank you. So if you came to this to understand better about what's the current state of telehealth right now in emergency medicine, this is pretty much the wide-ranging as it is. So we have that whole continuum of sort of emergency or acute unscheduled care, where you start at, the point of when EMS is called. So we have telehealth with the community paramedicine represented here. We have the transfer coordination. So I didn't describe my programs, but with the programs at Mass General, we use telehealth to help with transfer coordination with some of our hospitals that refer into us. There is the teletriage and helping maybe triage at multiple different sites. There is the telecare, tele-urgent care, working with patients there, and tele-follow-up, and many other sort of shades of telehealth now interacting with emergency medicine. So thank you so much for coming here, because you guys have such great experience with this already. And so for those who have questions, feel free to ask more later on individually, but also we'll have that time to ask those questions. I think one question that probably many here and I were thinking when I heard this was, how is this funded? So do you mind just going down the line and just talking about where the funding is from this? Because we all recognize the reimbursement's not really at that point where every single one of these interactions is being reimbursed by the insurance companies. So if you don't mind, maybe Peter, if you just mind giving a little brief how it's funded.
Sure. We're billing where we can, but that's a small portion of what we're doing. Some of the service lines I just mentioned are a reallocation of resources that increases efficiency. But for the most part, these programs are funded at the institutional level, I think as a speculative endeavor to try to increase the tool set available should we move to a different sort of payment system where we're paid for outcomes rather than procedures. So speculative money is my short answer.
So we're venture backed, and so that's how we're able to build this out. We do some fee-for-service where we can, as well as some value-based care contracts. But yeah, a lot of this is just building something awesome and hoping with new bills being introduced in Congress and with CMS kind of catching up with reality, that reimbursement will soon follow.
Ours is similar at Jefferson to what Peter was describing. It was at an institutional level. It came from the top down initially. As far as our direct-to-consumer on-demand program, patients can do it fee-for-service. However, we do have some insurance that pays for it. Our employees get it discounted as well. So that's how we do that. And as far as our teletriage, it's part of the emergency room budget.
We're at the same spot. I fund it exactly like she funds it.
Great. And then how? Oh, yes, sorry.
Did you say you're using APPs with a doc overlooking their shoulder? Do you only give up shared visits and go to PA-only visits because of that, or are you at PA-only visits anyway?
So it's interesting. For the triage nurse at one hospital, we're looking over their shoulder. We're not looking over APP shoulders. What we've done at one of the hospitals is get rid of the triage nurse totally, and it's just a tech that's there doing vital signs. All the triage is done by I'll call it the teleprovider. We actually call it the intake provider at this point, and we've changed it from teletriage to teleintake because we're not actually triaging. We don't put a triage class on. We just intake them and get their stuff going. But we've stepped that away from a physician and towards an APP based on our staffing model, but nobody oversees that. Then the complexity of that, and this gets into money and reimbursement in ways that I can't give you an answer because nobody can. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. There's a couple different things that could happen. You could come in and be seen by a physician. Well, now a physician's seen you, and you go to fast track and get seen by an APP. Well, that physician can attest to and oversee that patient because they really saw them, we think. You could come in and be seen by an APP, and you either go to the main ED where you'll get a physician, or you go to fast track where you might get another APP. Well, what's the billing level for that, right? And so there basically is a 3-by-3 table of things that could happen, each one of which has a different provider. One of the goals for us, our contracts, we can't talk money, but some of them have bundled payments for emergency medicine, and then they changed their policy and said if it's a bundled payment, you can't just co-sign the APP note. You actually have to walk in a room, shake the hand, and see the patient. So we're wrestling with ways that we don't lose money by going to this teletriage process and putting an APP there. And as you could imagine, there's a significant financial analysis because maybe it's $100 cheaper to have an APP there. Well, what does our practice plan get? $100 a patient. So if I have one APP doing that and I'm saving money, maybe there's a balancing point at which it works. And so we're struggling with how to do that. We've also had a large working group together, and we have figured out not how to do it, but how we're going to do it, how we can discharge from the front door. So when the provider sees that patient, they could be discharged without seeing anybody else, or maybe going through and getting an X-ray and circling back and then being discharged just by telemedicine. So you got to work through the EMTALA regulations on that as a medical screening exam, and no one will give guidance, including CMS. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And what we're doing, is this recorded?
Yeah, we're looking forward to Jefferson figuring that out, by the way.
So they're off.
This is not being recorded that I know of. I wasn't told that.
Okay, so since this is not being recorded, what we are doing is we're changing our policies so that our policy is really simple. We're going to have one overarching telemedicine policy that says telemedicine is just a different care delivery mechanism. Nothing else is different. Boom, done. It's going to be a paragraph. In reality is we don't have telemedicine PI. Aditi's program rolls up through performance improvement in our department. Urologies should roll up through performance improvement in their department. The amount of requests I get about rev cycle and billing, I'm not the damn expert. Talk to the rev cycle and billing people in the institution. And it's taken a couple years to make everybody own telemedicine as part of what they do. So now our legal team, our compliance officers, everybody has begun to realize that telemedicine is part of their job too. And we actually have some big working groups and governing councils that get together on a monthly basis to hash out some of this stuff with multiple subgroups when something like this comes up to work through. So in the context of it's just another care delivery mechanism, our EMTALA policy will be modified a little bit, and we found a mistake. We just passed an enterprise-wide EMTALA policy that actually uses the word physician rather than provider. So technically, every time you're getting seen by an APP, we violated our own medical screening exam policy. So now it has to go through, it's 14 hospitals, has to go through 8 million different boards to be changed because it was already approved, but it's ridiculous. And so we had the little debate, do we say whether they're seen in person or telemedicine or stay silent on it? And we came out and said, they're seen. We're not going to say how they're seen because maybe they'll be seen by digital health down the road or artificial intelligence or some other manner that still makes sense. And at the end of the day, we're holding ourselves to the standard, which is an easy standard. You just got to do what's right for the patient. And if they need an X-ray and you don't get an X-ray in the ER, well, that's really bad, right? If they need a neurologist because they have expertise and you don't have it, well, that's really bad. Same thing in telemedicine. If they need somebody to touch and examine them and you don't do it, well, that's not so good. So we're trying to make everything exactly the same in doing that, but there's a lot of guesswork.
Great. So switching to another question that people may have too is, how are the emergency medicine, is this required for each of your groups? I know for Call9, it's you can apply for a job there. You have that. It's not affiliated with a specific academic institution. But for Weill Cornell and for Jefferson, is this required of all the ED physicians? Is it a subset? How is that being staffed? I know there's several programs, but sort of in general. So
Initially, like I had briefly mentioned, the on-demand was a dedicated set of people, mainly because we needed everyone to have 3 licenses. So that's how it started out. But as it continued, we actually now require that everybody who comes in and any new faculty have to have 3 licenses, so they have the ability to do on-demand. As far as teletriage, because it's replaced our intake shift, we have way more of our faculty now working those shifts. So that's what I meant there. We're having a lot more physicians do telemedicine overall. Not everyone does on-demand. They don't have to, but more people do want to. So they have more ability to have different types of shifts. We have, we run 3 urgent cares. We have on-demand shifts. We have teletriage. We have ED shifts. So because of that, we have a lot of different types of things. And the more people who are trained in it, the more different types of shifts they do. So yes, most new physicians who are now applying will be doing telehealth.
So our institution has taken a slightly more conservative approach. We're taking only physicians who are 4 or more years out from their board, and we're also applying a subjective fitness criteria. We are not throwing this out to all of our ED docs, but rather docs we think will be good at it and flexible enough to do it. And that's part of a rigorous, dedicated quality improvement effort that we do in all these service lines as well.
So your crappy, inexperienced docs can work an overnight shift alone with no one else in the hospital, but they can't do tele-intake?
The nature of our EDs rarely have a physician working by themselves, and we also apply some of these same criteria to avoid the situation that you just mentioned.
Great.
And we think that telemedicine shifts have a degree of independence that is not present in regular ED work, that we just want to move cautiously.
So following up on that a little bit, what type of education or onboarding do you have for your providers? So it can go, I mean, I could see it being that now you have a shift, it's just like FaceTime, good luck, or how do you do this? So if you don't mind just going down the line of how you do some onboarding and education.
I make Aditi work her butt off. I mean, she can describe, and I'll overall give you the framework of the education. She could talk about the specific ER programs, but we have tried to create and replicate everything you would have in training everything else. So we have a physician fellowship for a year, which is funded like an ultrasound fellowship is funded. You get basically paid for your clinical time and your admin time's free, and it works out pretty well for people, and they come in and go through extensive training. We have a resident elective, we have a med student elective, we have undergrad students involved. We've partnered with Teladoc to have a fellowship for staff, an operational fellowship for people to do it. And we've created all kinds of training modules and simulation training and in-person training, and I'll let Aditi describe the specific training for, I guess, tele-intake and on-demand is the two most common things.
So yeah, for our physicians that are doing it, we have a set of modules that they all have to do in our learning in our learning area that were created a few years ago, just in the basics of telemedicine. We have an entire set of training of how to do a visit, set up an account, basic troubleshooting, as well as doing a bunch of practice calls, both for on-demand and for teletriage. We also created a CME and training videos on how to do telemedicine physical exam that all our faculty do as well prior to doing these shifts. And I do a chart review for all new physicians that have started telehealth. I do them for about 2 months and check in to make sure that they're doing the right documentation.
So at Call9, a lot of, you're going to hear the same thing over and over again, but we do have training modules, asynchronous, and so a lot of things that are expected for the provider to do ahead of time. And then we do training shifts, and so a mentor or more senior person will do shifts to see actual patients alongside the new doc coming on. In addition, and so that also has like a little bit of a QA piece to it, depending on outcomes and depending on feedback. Somebody may need a refresher or may need extra support. Because we have on-site first responder, that relationship is really important, and sort of the dance between your hands on site and the person remotely is really important. And so there's a lot of training on that, the situational awareness, as well as just building on the relationship with the first responder, who's our employee, as well as the SNF. In addition, because we do a lot of palliative care, and there's a ton of EM providers, there's a lot of communications and primary palliative care training that a lot of these folks who are more senior, we too like more senior docs, to come on board, didn't get in residency, right? Most of us didn't get much palliative care education. And so because we're in SNFs, because there's so much symptom management that occurs, there's just an extra level of training specific to that piece. And then we have rotating residents from SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn, so they come on, and there's that piece of telemedicine education and who gets to train them, and that's been really wonderful. And then QA and all that stuff that comes into it has kind of one-on-one training and follow-up that occurs.
We're having a lot of fun with the educational piece, and I wish my colleague Neel Naik, for whom this is his primary responsibility, could have been here. Unfortunately, there were some unexpected and not nice things happening in his family. But the nature of our educational programs, and we break this up in different ways when we're talking about medical students, residents, or people actively involved in practice, is a simulation-based education program. So we have standardized patients representing patients who one might encounter in a telemedicine visit. We record those videos, again, not real patients, but standardized patient actors. And then we use group debriefing sessions. For those of you in the sim world, we use an advocacy inquiry model. And the small groups are riveted in attention because we're showing the videos of the providers in the small group. It's amazing how well that harnesses people's attention and gets buy-in. We are doing programs of that sort for all third-year medical students at Weill Cornell now. We have an elective that's a little more in-depth for fourth-year medical students. We have an elective within our own residency. And we're doing onboarding of physicians enterprise-wide using a model like that, setting up 2 sessions for early next month with primary care providers, where we're doing a simulation-based model with a couple different encounters. In the group debriefs, we cover areas of HIPAA compliance, areas of physical exam, very much an evolving body of knowledge, and also web etiquette. There are certain things that work at the bedside that don't work so well when you're only from here up and two-dimensional. We explore the nature of what works and what doesn't in the small group sessions through the use of the videos that we record. It's a work in progress, but it's a lot of fun.
Great, thank you. So before we start shifting out to talk a little more about future, I want to make sure that questions you may have right now, that you can start to ask those. So in terms of sort of the current state of emergency medicine and telehealth, what questions do you have for the panel? Yeah.
This is very much on our mind. We're waiting for that RFP to come out, unless it's posted in the last 12 hours, and I don't know about it. We, as I said, have a program where we have a dedicated ambulance available for point of deterioration of patients who have strong relationship with our institution already, primarily with our congestive heart failure patients, but again, expanding it out. How that will look with ET3, which for those of you who don't know, ET3 is, CMS is doing what I understand is a pilot project that will have a couple components that touch on this area. One will be triaging people in place at the point of an EMS 911 call and providing for alternate transportation other than to the emergency department. But couched in the initial language about ET3 was also the potential for billing for telemedicine being part of that on-scene triage, with some language that suggests there'll be a component of that that allows for patients like I was just describing, patients who have established medical homes, and using telemedicine to treat them. So how our program will fit in with ET3, unclear, and our program is in early enough stages that we may end up modifying it to meet funding opportunities, but it's very much on our mind.
So I would agree with almost everything Peter said there. We'll do one thing that's a little different. We won't modify our program to meet funding opportunities. So one of the things that is particularly interesting about Jefferson is we have made the very consistent decision that we're going to do what is strategically most important for our patients. And so we are internally funded, and hence we don't need to chase things that have funding that distract from our major vision. We think ET3 happens to be very much aligned with our major vision and hope to do it, but within the limited amount of information that's available, it might actually not be, because it looks like the application has to come from, effectively for us, the fire department, the 911 agency. Peter's idea of, the ambulance controlled by, New York Presby might not actually work because it may not be an on-scene 911 thing or large enough. We believe we probably need to partner with Philadelphia EMS. We're in Philly, New York EMS there. That may be a heavy lift as to whether or not these EMS agencies, despite the funding, can do it with some hospitals, or in my neck of the woods, whether there's a patient who would otherwise go to Penn who now wants to do telemedicine with Jefferson, or how is the EMS agencies going to determine who does telemedicine. And it's not clear to me they pay for the telemedicine. It is clear to me that EMS right now only gets paid if they transport. And what is clear to me in that grant is they will get paid whether or not they transport, but I don't know whether that payment would flow through to New York Presby or to Jefferson for doing the telemedicine on the other end, because we do medical control and we don't get any payment for medical control from EMS. So I think we really need to see how it comes out to determine how the alignment is. It's exactly the kind of thing we should be doing with healthcare delivery, so its heart's in the right spot. But the government's had their heart in the right spot in many things before, and they've been entirely screwed up, HIPAA as an example. So we'll see what actually comes out when the RFP comes out.
I tell you, I think it's really interesting for our specialty, though, that this is even being talked about. I mean, who is the appropriate physician to help triage a patient in place? Or maybe not a physician. Who's the appropriate person to triage a patient in place? It's the acute care specialist. Right? I think this is going to be a really fascinating time for us.
We had another question over here. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for a great session. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what are the big gaps in knowledge, what are the areas that you would like to fill, research gaps, otherwise that we don't know, in emergency medicine. We'll all be very excited about it. I'm sure there are areas that are open.
Put the plug for the next thing on there for the consensus conference also. For those who don't know about it, we can still talk. I'm still going to jump this in there. This is going to be the pre-conference day for SAEM next year. So we are going to be delving, and I know you know this because you're already at the meetings, we're going to be delving into this. So we can talk about this briefly here. There's a session right after this that's actually going to really delve into this. But if you don't mind, just maybe a couple of things that you wish you could see out there in the research right now, just down the line.
I want to know more about what exam factors work with direct video interaction with patients and what don't. I'm consistently hearing telemedicine is nice, but you can't do an exam. That's utter nonsense, but I want data to demonstrate that that's utter nonsense. I can do a decent exam in telemedicine. It's not the same as an in-person exam, but then again, the type of exam one does in the office is different than the type of exam one does in the hallway of the emergency department. It's a different environment, and there will be different performance characteristics. I want to learn what those performance characteristics are.
I think for us, there's just a lot of opportunity to talk about outcomes in sort of very chronically ill people who have acute decompensation, especially in the post-acute care setting, and how those outcomes affect basically just outcomes and quality. I do strongly believe, especially given the data that we have, that we can keep people out of the hospital. We can do a whole heck of a lot to wedge ourselves in the post-acute care setting, where there's just so much talk and so much issues with the hospitals and nursing homes and the 30-day readmits, and I really feel that telemedicine has an amazing opportunity of really bridging that gap and just the push and pull of money and reimbursement, keeping people out of the hospital.
So I'm going to talk about, we did a dive into some of the research with ASAP, so not SAEM, but we did look at that. And at some of the gaps for emergency care, I like to compare to what's going on in telestroke, which has had a lot more literature. It's been around a lot longer. And I agree with what both of these guys are saying about it. And what you see in a lot of that literature is because it's been around long enough, they actually have some findings on outcomes, like how do people do, how has it affected the community, how has it affected, how many people have gotten TPA, how fast are they seeing patients. And I think some of these outcome-based research needs to happen. And in general, there isn't enough prospective trials. Most of them are retrospective or qualitative studies. And so there needs to be a lot more dedicated research in that way, just like it is for any type of emergency research.
So if you're around for the next session, you'll hear when we open that, we'll talk about the National Quality Forum Measure Framework for Telehealth, which they've created, which is going to ultimately drive CMS pay for performance measures. And so I think the research we should do should align with the measure framework that NQF has. And there's, multiple subdomains, but there's 4 major domains. It's access, it's cost and cost effectiveness, it's effectiveness, right, that's quality, and it's experience. And it's not actually just like patient satisfaction experience. Taking neurostroke, it's like, what's the impact on the community of having a neurostroke center? It might actually be horrible, because if you're a community that has one neurologist and you just took away their stroke patients, they may not have money, they may move out of the community, and now you got nobody for migraine, Parkinson's, and everything else. So we really just need to determine, what is the impact in the setting of those 4 domains. And I think anything we do that doesn't align with that isn't going to drive payment policy. And at the end of the day, if you don't get paid, all of our programs are going to go away. So one of my senior leaders at the hospital, says, we're not in medicine to make money, but if we don't make money, we sure won't be in medicine for very long. And telemedicine is the same way. So I would advocate that all our research should drive to answer the one fundamental question that will allow it to exist, which is it cost effective? And if we do things that don't get us there, we're spinning our wheels, because nobody cares at the CMS payer level whether patients are happy. They care whether it's cost effective to do it. And that's sad, but that's what it is. And so everything we do should move incrementally more towards that step and learn. And the other thing I'll say is we have to not get caught with the traps. Telemedicine is not the same as an in-person exam. It might be better, because 30% of people in my health system and your system don't show up on any given day for an appointment. But 14% of people in my health system don't show up for a telemedicine appointment. So I have 16 people out of every 100 who now have a telemedicine exam as compared to no exam, and a conversation as compared to no conversation. So I like to say, even if telemedicine is inferior to an in-person exam, it's better for those people, and it may be so much better for those people, it's worth the 2% decrement for other people. These are things we don't know. What I've learned as the provider who does this, and all of us take calls, is I get to see the house. I have people walk around with the phone. I see whether they have a steady gait. I have just a different exam, and I would advocate that for an asthmatic, where people say, oh my God, you need to listen to the lungs, that's a load of crap, because people call their primary care provider and get prescribed stuff over the phone all the time without even seeing whether they're breathing comfortably. But if I get to see their house looks like a pigsty and there's dust all over the place, I have a different intervention than just upping their albuterol and giving them prednisone. And I never get that when I see people in the office. So I don't know whether, I have a video I show when I give talks that shows artificial intelligence and knows the pollen count in the patient's home, right, or in their neighborhood on their block, right? We don't even know if it's raining during our shifts, because it's like a casino and we don't look outside. So the advantage of telemedicine, it might actually be just different and better, or maybe it's worse, or maybe it's as good. And we just need to sort out these things in a logical manner that will help drive care.
Currently, most of the direct-to-consumer literature that you probably have heard shows that it's not cost-effective, it's not actually increasing access. However, as far as like acute care telemedicine, it hasn't been around long enough for us to really have that or take that seriously, like you're mentioning. It has to be around longer, like telestroke has been. And it's worth looking into that if people want to look at the research, because they've shown how it's affected, because they've been around that long.
Great. So we have just a couple of minutes left, so I do want to touch upon the future. And so do you guys mind just going down the row and sort of what do you envision the future of emergency medicine given what's going on in the telehealth realm right now, or digital realm? Peter?
What I'm excited about is this tool set is going to allow us to do different kinds of patient touch to meet different kinds of needs. It'll no longer be a choice of being hospitalized or not being hospitalized. We're going to be able to provide care in a wide variety of different ways, in a wide variety of locations, and be able to custom tailor care to what our patients actually need. And I'm looking forward to being part of how we learn to do that.
I think, and I'm sure everybody's going to say something similar, but that telemedicine is just medicine. That's what I hope the future is, that people just, it's just part of the care, that it's not icky and weird or feeling like for providers that they're in some way de-escalating their career because of telemedicine, and if anything, you're just elevating it. So yeah, telemedicine is just part of the care that you can get in the emergency department. In addition, my hope is that more and more programs pop up, that CMS gets it together, and that bills are passed through Congress that just allow us to get paid for the amazing work that we do. And that this gets implemented into residency programs in a formalized way. And yeah, I'm not asking for too much, am I? No.
As far as telehealth, I think what I agree with everyone says about we're going to go toward a more home-based healthcare. A lot of these tools that we think about in digital health, because again, I mentioned I do teach some digital health, but all of the other tools that people talk about is a big popular term. The machine learning, the AI, the VR, all of that is actually going to change how we do telehealth. I think all of these tools are going to make telehealth better. It's going to give us an ability to not have to think about smaller things and be able to take care of patients in a more focused manner with all of these tools that we're going to eventually learn. So it's exciting to think that how it's going to impact how we work, what our shifts are, how we're going to teach, because it's going to change drastically when we have those tools at our disposal, because our brains are going to be able to take in more and not have to do some of this busy work on the side.
Yeah, I think about telemedicine a little different than other people, because I think about emergency medicine different than other people. Like if you walk around this meeting and ask, the residents what's cool about emergency medicine, why you're in it, it's because people are dying and they could resuscitate and they could do procedures and they could do ultrasound, and that stuff's all really cool and really fun. And I look around this room and, most of the people in this room are old enough that that's probably not as much fun as it used to be anymore, and you realize that your real service to the community is not resuscitation and critical care. It's really being available. And I like to talk about is what we really are is we're the availabilists. When everybody's too lazy or they're home or they can't be bothered, we're the people who are there to take care of patients. And I have actually real concerns that as medicine evolves, the fact that people who choose to go into emergency medicine go into it for the wrong reason. We all go into it because it's cool and it's fun. And after a while, you've seen everything stick out of every orifice you could ever see, and the cocktail party stories sort of fade away. You're left actually really just taking care of patient needs. And I spend time asking patients, particularly on telemedicine, when they wake me up at 4:41 in the morning, which is the most common overnight time I get calls, why are you calling at 4:41? And they all give me the same answer. It's lunch hour. They're a night shift person on lunch hour. It makes perfectly good sense to be calling at 4:40 or coming to the ER with a cold at 3. We need to be available for people. And I think if we don't get off our butts and realize as emergency physicians what our core value is to our enterprise, somebody else is going to do this, or it's going to get outsourced to Amazon or Walgreens or Call9 or Doctors on Demand or MD Live or Teladoc, and we're not really going to have a job because they're not really going to keep a whole bunch of us around for the 2 people that need to be resuscitated, on each shift. So I think the world's changing, and we should drive the change because, as Peter said, we are uniquely skilled to be doing this. And so I think for us, it's an exciting chance for emergency physicians to take over a little more ownership through the whole healthcare enterprise and go with it. So most of you are here because you probably do a little telemedicine. I know some of you do, or you're thinking about it. And I would say just reframe what it is. It's just not another critical care thing. It's actually really taking care of people the way they want to be taken care of. And that's what our value proposition is.
All right, to be honest, I can't sum up any more than just those right there. So we are out of time. The panelists may be able to be here maybe a few more minutes for questions if you want to come up. And for those who want to, the next one in this same room is actually best evidence in telehealth and emergency medicine. So feel free to stay, stretch your legs, but thank you for your time today.